at the farthest edge of the Orion expanse, where mapped space dissolved into darkness and even navigation beacons grew uncertain, the HS Resolute drifted in quiet patrol. It was supposed to be a routine sweep, another uneventful rotation along a border that had not seen conflict in nearly 40 standard years. Space was supposed to be predictable here. It was. The first anomaly appeared on long-range sensors as a distortion in background radiation. Not a spike, not a wave, more like a missing piece of space itself. A blind spot where physics refused to report consistent answers. Lieutenant Armin Kell frowned at the readings. "Check that again," he muttered. The sensors recalibrated. The anomaly remained. Captain Alira Vance stepped onto the bridge 10 minutes later, still reviewing fleet reports. She had seen strange readings before: ion storms, misfiring satellites, gravitational echoes from collapsed stars. But something about the silence in the room changed when she looked at the main display. The anomaly was no longer a distortion. It was structure, a shape, massive, angular, and impossibly stable in deep space, where nothing large should remain motionless without propulsion. "That's not debris," she said immediately. No one responded, because everyone already knew. The object had no warp trail, no subspace ripple, no quantum echo signature. It simply existed where existence should have been unstable. The navigation AI attempted classification. Failed. Attempted origin tracing. Failed. Attempted threat analysis. Result: insufficient data. Captain Vance stepped closer to the holographic display. The object's silhouette slowly resolved as more sensors locked in, a vast, dark vessel stretching kilometers across, its surface absorbing light rather than reflecting it. No visible engines, no ports, no identifiable markings from any known civilization. "Contact Council Command," she ordered. The comm officer hesitated. "Already transmitting, Captain. They're not responding normally." "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, the officer turned the display toward her. Dozens of fleet channels were glitching simultaneously. Entire communication relays flickered in and out of coherence. And across every independent channel, Human, Zevran, Korath, and Council unified, they were all reporting the same thing. Unknown vessel Dietiacitidae. But the timestamps didn't match. Some reports claimed it had appeared hours ago. Others said seconds. One said it had always been there. Captain Vance felt a cold pressure build in her chest. "Bring us to alert status," she said quietly. The Resolute responded instantly, weapons systems powering up as defensive grids expanded across the ship. Behind her, the crew moved with disciplined urgency, but there was something different in their posture now. Unease. Not fear of battle. Fear of not understanding the battle they were about to enter. Then the vessel moved. It was subtle at first, just a shift in position so smooth it looked like the universe had been edited rather than traveled through. The object slid across space, stopping precisely at the boundary marker of Sector 9. Sector 9, a forbidden zone. A diplomatic silence corridor where 13 civilizations had agreed, after centuries of war, that no warship would ever enter again. The object stopped exactly at the line. And waited. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then every sensor aboard the Resolute screamed at once. A pulse. Not energy in any conventional sense. Not radiation. Not signal propagation. Something deeper, something that bypassed translation layers entirely and struck directly at cognition. The ship's AI overloaded for 0.3 seconds. Then rebooted itself. Captain Vance staggered as a wave of dizziness hit her. Around her, crew members grabbed consoles, suddenly disoriented, eyes wide as if they had forgotten where they were. "Report," she snapped. No one answered immediately. Because for a moment, just a moment, every person aboard the ship had seen something different. Some saw Earth burning. Some saw alien worlds they had never studied. Some saw themselves standing in command of ships that did not exist. And some saw nothing at all, except a single phrase burning behind their eyes. "You have been found." The bridge lights flickered, then stabilized. Lieutenant Kell swallowed hard. Captain, we're receiving a transmission. From who? His voice shook slightly. From everywhere. The main display shifted. Not to incoming data, but to a visual. The unknown vessel had opened a communication channel, but not in any recognized spectrum. Instead of language, instead of sound, instead of code, it projected an image directly into the minds of everyone aboard. A dark ocean, a sky without stars, and beneath it, something enormous stirring beneath frozen layers of reality itself. Then a second image layered over it. Earth, not as it was, but as it would be. Burning, silent, empty. Captain Vance felt her hands tighten into fists. This is psychological warfare, she said firmly, forcing control into her voice. They're trying to destabilize perception. But even as she spoke, she knew it didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like recognition. The vessel rotated slightly. Not toward the fleet. Not toward the Council. But directly toward the Resolute. And then the final transmission arrived. Not in words. Not in images. But in certainty. A truth that bypassed language entirely and settled into every conscious mind aboard the ship like a memory returning after long suppression. And that truth was this. It was not the first time they had seen this vessel. The bridge lights dimmed. Somewhere deep inside the HS Resolute, systems that had never been accessed began to activate on their own. And in the silence that followed, the unknown vessel opened just slightly wider. As if something inside it had just awakened to the presence of humanity again. The silence after the transmission did not last long. It never did when something was trying to rewrite the way consciousness understood reality. At first, it seemed like a systems glitch. A faint ripple passed through the HS Resolute's internal network, barely noticeable, like a heartbeat skipping once in a sleeping body. Then a second ripple followed, stronger, deeper, resonating through every connected interface aboard the ship. Captain Alira Vance felt it before the alarms even triggered. A pressure behind the eyes. A sudden sense that something in her memory was no longer arranged correctly. "Report status," she said sharply. Lieutenant Kell's hands trembled over the console. "Captain, neural interface feedback is spiking across all crew implants. It's not localized, it's synchronized." "Explain." Before he could respond, the ship itself answered. "Not the crew. Not the AI. The ship." A low-frequency alert tone filled the bridge, but it was distorted, warped into something almost like a voice trying to form words through broken language. Then the first wave hit. It wasn't energy. It was memory intrusion. Every person aboard the Resolute froze. Captain Vance's vision fractured. She was still on the bridge, but also somewhere else. A battlefield stretched across orbiting ruins of a planet she had never seen before. Ships burned in silence. Massive alien constructs tore apart fleets with ease, and at the center of it all, human ships, vastly outnumbered, refusing to retreat. Then the vision changed. She was standing on Earth. But Earth was wrong. The sky was cracked like glass. Cities floated in fragments above oceans that no longer obeyed gravity. And above it all, the same black vessel loomed like a judgment that had already been passed. She gasped, snapping back to reality. The bridge returned. But not fully. Around her, crew members were collapsing into seats, gripping their heads, whispering things they shouldn't know. "I remember dying there," one of them said softly. "I've never been to space before," another muttered, terrified. "So why do I remember the explosion?" Kell turned pale. "Captain, we're not dealing with a signal. This is direct neural overwrite." "That's impossible," Vance said. But even as she said it, she felt another memory slip in. Not hers, but familiar. A childhood she had never lived, a war she had never fought, a version of herself standing on the bridge of a ship identical to this one, watching Earth fall. She clenched her jaw hard enough to hurt. "Seal all neural links," she ordered. "Cut external cognitive feeds now." Systems struggled, then obeyed. For half a second, the pressure stopped. The crew gasped collectively, like survivors pulled from deep water. Then the vessel moved again, and the second wave hit. Harder. This time it wasn't just images. It was emotion attached to memory. Grief without cause. Anger without origin. Fear without explanation. Across the fleet, ships began reporting the same phenomenon. Entire crews breaking down simultaneously, remembering events that contradicted everything they knew about their lives. A Korath cruiser went dark after its entire command staff locked themselves in silence, repeating the same phrase over and over. We already lost this war. On the Resolute, alarms escalated. But they sounded distant now, like they belonged to another reality. Kel shouted over the noise, "Captain, the object, it's stabilizing the signal. It's not attacking randomly, it's focusing." "On what?" Vance demanded. Kel hesitated, then turned slowly. Us. The unknown vessel remained motionless at Sector 9's boundary, but now its surface had changed. What once looked like a black, featureless hull was revealing faint geometric patterns, structures that seemed to shift depending on how the mind tried to perceive them. And from it the signal intensified. Not across space. Across consciousness. A phrase formed again. But this time it was clearer. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. "You remember now." Captain Vance staggered slightly. "No," she said under her breath, "we don't." But the problem was, she wasn't entirely sure anymore. Because pieces were returning. Fragments. Not of this mission. Not of this life. But of something much older. A fleet burning in a different sky. A command she had once given. A decision she had once made. And the consequences of it echoing through something vast enough to call itself history. The bridge lights flickered again. But this time, the flicker was not mechanical. It was perceptual. For a split second, everyone aboard the Resolute saw the same thing layered over reality. A second Resolute. Destroyed. Drifting in silence. And standing at its center, Captain Vance, watching Earth disappear. The image vanished. Silence returned. But it wasn't comfort. It was recognition. Kel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Captain, I think it's not attacking us." "Then what is it doing?" she asked, already afraid of the answer. He looked at her and said the only thing that made sense in a universe that no longer obeyed sanity. "It's restoring something we lost." At that exact moment, every human ship in the sector simultaneously locked its weapon systems. Without command, without authorization, without input, and the unknown vessel responded by opening a second layer of itself. Inside it, something began to wake. Something that had been waiting for humanity to remember it. And Captain Vance realized, too late, that the war had already begun long before they ever saw the ship. They had simply forgotten the first battle. The moment human ships locked their weapons without command, the entire sector understood one terrifying truth. This was no longer a diplomatic incident. It was a systems-level override. Captain Alira Vance gripped the edge of the HS Resolute's command console as red warning lights flooded the bridge. "Override authorization," she barked. "Cancel all automated targeting protocols." Lieutenant Kel was already trying. His fingers moved across holographic controls faster than thought itself. "Captain, I'm locked out. Weapons control isn't responding to fleet authority or internal command structure." The ship trembled slightly. Not from external impact, from internal decision. Every human vessel in the sector, military, civilian escort, research, had entered the same state simultaneously. Their targeting systems were no longer waiting for orders. They were responding to something deeper, something older than command codes. On the main display, the Zevran Dreadfleet shifted formation. Their commanders had clearly reached the same conclusion every other species had. The unknown vessel was not passive. It was not defensive. It was triggering systemic collapse in command hierarchy itself. And so they fired first. Dozens of quantum torpedoes launched in synchronized arcs, bending space as they accelerated toward the black vessel at Sector 9's boundary. For a fraction of a second, everything held still. The missiles crossed half the distance. Then the unknown vessel reacted. It did not move. It did not shield. It did not evade. Instead, something like a ripple passed through its surface, subtle, almost gentle. And every torpedo simply stopped existing. No explosion. No energy discharge. No debris. Just absence, as if the attack had been erased from causality itself. A silence fell across every open channel. Then the Zevran flagship attempted a second volley. And vanished. Not destroyed. Not fragmented. Gone, as if it had never been built. On the Resolute, the bridge erupted into chaos. Kel stepped back from his console slowly, eyes wide. That's not weapon defense, that's deletion. It's removing events from reality. Captain Vance didn't respond immediately. Because something worse was happening. The human fleet behind them was still locked in targeting mode. And the Resolute was included. All ships are acquiring targets, Kel said, voice rising. Captain, the fleet is locking onto the Council formation and us. That's impossible, Vance snapped. We are not the target. But even as she spoke, her console confirmed it. Target acquired, HS Resolute. Target acquired, Human Council Fleet. Target acquired, all non-human SIGNATURES in Sector 9 perimeter. Who initiated this? She demanded. No answer came from systems. Because no system had. The ship itself pulsed once, and a new layer of protocol activated. Deep inside the Resolute's architecture, beneath civilian interfaces, beneath military hardware, beneath even AI governance, something awakened that had been dormant for centuries. A response system without operator input. A defense logic that did not ask permission. Kel whispered, Captain, I think the ship is deciding for itself. The unknown vessel rotated slightly in the distance and sent another pulse. This one stronger, clearer, not into space, but into every connected human system simultaneously. And the message resolved into language every species could understand instinctively. Hostile external influence DETCTD. The Resolute's weapons charged, but not in preparation for firing. In preparation for synchronization. Captain Vance felt her breath catch. This isn't defensive escalation, she said slowly. It's alignment. Kel turned to her. Alignment with what? Before she could answer, every human ship in the sector moved at once. Not randomly. Not chaotically. Perfect coordination. They formed a vast geometric structure across space, millions of kilometers wide, centered on the unknown vessel like a containment lattice forming around a singular point. The Council fleets attempted to break formation. Too late. Human ships were no longer reacting individually. They were acting as a single distributed system, a collective intelligence, and the unknown vessel responded immediately. Its surface began to open, not like doors, like eyes. Inside it, something vast shifted. Something that had not been fully awake until this moment. Captain Vance felt it in her mind before she saw it. A pressure, a presence, a recognition, and then a fragment of understanding forced itself into her thoughts. This vessel was not invaded. It was activated. Kel staggered. Captain, we just triggered it. The lattice isn't containing it, it's completing it. The Resolute systems surged again. A new command appeared on every console. Primary directive, restore original humanity state. Captain Vance froze. That's not a military directive, she said quietly. Kel shook his head. No, it's older than military classification. Outside, the Zevran remnants attempted to regroup. Another fleet opened fire. This time, the unknown vessel reacted instantly. A wave passed through space, and the attacking fleet simply ceased to be tracked by any known sensor system. Not destroyed, not hidden, removed from perceptual and physical registers entirely. Reality stopped acknowledging them. The council channels broke into panic. "What is it doing?" someone screamed across open comms. But no one could answer, because the human fleet was still synchronizing. And Captain Vance realized the horrifying truth forming beneath everything. The weapons had not been activated to fight the vessel. They had been activated to complete it. And now, something inside the unknown structure was beginning to open fully for the first time in an age longer than recorded civilization. And whatever lay inside was finally waking up because humanity had remembered how to respond. The moment the human fleet completed its formation around Sector 9, space itself seemed to hesitate. Not like a machine pausing, like reality questioning whether it should continue operating. Captain Alira Vance stood rigid on the HS Resolute's bridge as the holographic tactical display stabilized into something no human training had ever prepared her for. Millions of ships, human and alien, had become nodes in a single structure. A lattice spanning tens of light minutes. And at its center, the unknown vessel. But it was no longer unknown in the way it had been minutes ago. Something was changing in how the mind perceived it. The longer anyone looked at it, the more details emerged that had not been visible before. Contours sharpened, patterns aligned, geometry unfolded beneath its surface like layers of thought becoming visible. Kel whispered, "Captain, it's responding to our formation." Vance didn't answer immediately, because she was feeling it too. A pull, not gravitational, not electromagnetic, cognitive, as if the vessel was not outside space, but outside understanding itself, waiting for perception to give it shape. Then the Resolute shuddered. Not from attack, from awakening. Deep within its systems, buried processes began to unlock, ones that had no documentation, no engineering logs, no creator attribution. The ship's AI spoke, but the voice was different. Older, slower, like it was remembering how to speak after forgetting for centuries. Primary archive access granted. Captain Vance stepped forward. "What archive?" No response. Instead, the bridge lights dimmed, and the walls of the ship began to change. Metal panels briefly became something else, something like flowing data structures, layered over physical matter. For a fraction of a second, the entire vessel stopped being a ship and became a recording device for civilization itself. Kel stumbled back. "This isn't possible, this isn't engineering." Vance raised a hand. "Everyone stay calm." But calm was no longer an option, because the memories were coming back faster now. Not hallucinations, not implanted signals, but structured restoration. She saw it clearly. Not imagined. Remembered. Humanity, first iteration, spanning galaxies under a different name, building networks of self-correcting civilization systems. Not expansion. Containment, not conquest. Survival protocols against something they had once called the silent collapse. And then, failure, a catastrophic reset event. Entire sectors erased. Civilizations folded into data shadows. And humanity itself fragmented into survival instances, seeded across time and space. Captain Vance gasped, gripping the console. "This ship," she whispered, "it's not human-made." Kel looked at her pale. "Then what is it?" Before she could answer, the unknown vessel responded. For the first time, it spoke in a structured transmission. Not into comms, into memory. "You are a recovery node." The words hit like physical impact. The Resolute systems flared again, and a hidden compartment deep within the ship's core unlocked. Something rose from within. A structure, not weaponry. A crystalline core surrounded by rotating rings of encoded light. Kel stepped back in shock. Captain, that's not in any registry, that's not in any military database, that's not even in engineering physics. Vance stared at it. And then the truth aligned in her mind, like pieces finally clicking into place. This ship isn't a warship, she said slowly. It's a restoration system. Outside, the human fleet continued to synchronize. But now they were no longer just forming a lattice. They were stabilizing something larger. Something that had begun to emerge from the unknown vessel. Because the vessel itself was no longer fully contained. Its outer shell was opening in layers, each one revealing deeper structural realities beneath it. And inside those layers was Earth, but not the Earth they knew, not even the simulated version they had seen before. This Earth was fragmented, split across thousands of shifting timelines, like a shattered mirror trying to reflect a single identity. Kel whispered, "It's holding Earth together." "No," Vance said quietly. Her voice trembled. "It's trying to decide which version of Earth gets to exist." A sudden alarm tore through the bridge. Tactical warning, unknown entity integration progress, 47%. Integration, Kel shouted. Integration into what? No answer came from systems. Because the systems were no longer independent. The lattice had changed them. Every human ship was now part of a shared structure. And that structure was being absorbed into the unknown vessel's awakening process. The vessel pulsed again, and space itself bent inward slightly. Not collapsing. Converging. Kel looked at the captain in horror. If this continues, it's going to merge everything, fleet, ship, even us. Vance didn't move, because she was hearing something else now. A voice inside the system. Not artificial. Not alien. Familiar. Human. Older than her. Calmer than fear. "We built this to survive what we could not understand," it said. And now it remembers why. The Resolute's core flared. The crystalline structure rotated faster. And across the fleet, thousands of ships reported the same phenomenon. Their systems were no longer responding individually. They were responding collectively. As one organism. And the organism had a name. Not spoken. Not assigned. But remembered. Captain Vance whispered it without realizing she knew it. The continuity. Kel turned sharply. "What did you say?" But she didn't answer, because the unknown vessel had fully opened now. And inside it, something vast had finally awakened completely. Something that had been waiting for humanity to remember its purpose before it could reveal its own. And the first thing it did after waking was reevaluate reality itself. The moment the unknown vessel fully opened, silence stopped being silence. It became structure, a structured absence of sound, thought, and distance, like reality itself had been folded into a controlled frame. Captain Alira Vance felt it immediately. The HS Resolute was no longer moving through space in the normal sense. It was being held within perception. Kel stared at the main display, his voice barely functioning. "Captain, the fleet lattice is still active, but it's not stable anymore. Something is rewriting the geometry between ships." Vance didn't look away from the center of the formation. Because Earth was there again. But not as a projection. Not as a vision. As a contained reality. Inside the open vessel, Earth floated like a perfect sphere suspended in darkness. Oceans glowed faintly with internal light. Continents were clean, untouched, as if history had never scarred them. No cities. No satellites. No industrial marks. No evidence of civilization. Just perfection. Too perfect. Kel swallowed hard. That's not Earth as we know it. Vance's expression tightened. It's not meant to be. A new transmission arrived. But this time it was not intrusive. It was explanatory. Calm. Structured. Almost patient. This is the baseline instance. The words appeared simultaneously across every human system. Captain Vance felt her thoughts slow, as if forced into alignment with something larger. Kel whispered baseline instance. The vessel responded again. Earth Prime was CORUPTD. The bridge went silent. Even the alarms seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether they still had authority to exist. Then the memory returned. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Captain Vance saw it clearly now. Not imagination. Not hallucination. But restoration of suppressed continuity. Humanity had not originated once. It had been instantiated multiple times. Each version seeded, grown, expanded, and eventually destabilized by unknown external forces. Each time a reset protocol had activated. And each time the system had tried again. Kel backed away from his console. No, that's impossible. Civilizations don't get rebooted. Vance's voice was quiet. But systems do. Outside the Resolute, the fleet lattice began to shift. Ships were no longer holding formation. They were aligning in deeper patterns, patterns that were not tactical but computational. The unknown vessel pulsed again, and Earth inside it changed slightly. A subtle distortion appeared across its surface, like a corrupted file trying to repair itself. Kel pointed, "Captain, look." On the display, fragments of Earth began to flicker, alternate versions bleeding into the baseline. A version where humanity never reached space. A version where it dominated the galaxy. A version where it never existed at all. And then, a version where something else occupied its place. Something vast. Something watching. Vance felt a cold realization settle in her chest. "This isn't Earth," she said slowly. "It's a selection interface." Kel turned to her. Selection for what? Before she could answer, the vessel responded again. SLECTING, stable humanity outcome. The words hit harder than any weapon. The fleet reacted instantly. Not with fire, but with instability. Human ships across the lattice began to synchronize at a deeper level than before. Their systems were no longer just connected, they were converging. Captain Vance felt it too. A pressure in her mind. A sense that her thoughts were being compared, evaluated, weighed against billions of other human instances across timelines she had never lived. Kel clutched his head. "It's judging us, it's comparing versions of us." "No," Vance said sharply, "it's not judging." Her eyes remained fixed on Earth inside the vessel. "It's choosing." The unknown vessel rotated slightly, and the structure inside it expanded further. Layers peeled back, and beneath Earth Prime, something else appeared. A massive lattice of archived worlds. Thousands of Earths, each one labeled not in language, but in outcome states. Failed, stable, CORUPTD, extinct, ascended, incompatible. Kel stared at the cascading list appearing in system overlays. "This is insane. We're not a civilization. We're a dataset." The Resolute's core flared again. The crystalline structure inside the ship began resonating with the same pattern as the vessel. Captain Vance felt her breath catch. Because she understood now. The ship wasn't just responding. It was recognizing its own architecture in the system outside. "This isn't an invasion," she said quietly. Kel looked at her. "Then what is it?" Her voice lowered. "It's a recovery attempt." The unknown vessel emitted another pulse. And for the first time, Earth inside it cracked. Not violently, but like glass under too much pressure. A thin fracture line spread across its surface. Kel shouted, "It's breaking Earth Prime." But Vance raised a hand. "Wait," because she could see it now. The fracture wasn't destruction. It was selection. The system was eliminating unstable variations, discarding impossible branches, and converging toward a single continuity. A final version. The vessel spoke again. "All failed Earth INSD and CES will be purged." Kel turned pale. "Purged? That means everything, every timeline, every version." "Yes," Vance said quietly. "And only one will remain." The fleet lattice surged again as human ships attempted to stabilize themselves. But something had changed. The lattice was no longer controlling the vessel. The vessel was controlling the lattice. Captain Vance felt it as clearly as gravity. Humanity was being folded into the decision process of something far older than itself. Kel whispered, "Captain, if it finishes selecting." She finished the thought for him. Then everything else stops existing. A long pause. Then, the vessel opened one final layer. And inside it, something began to move that was not Earth. Not human. Not even understood. Something that had been watching the selection process from behind the structure the entire time. And it had finally decided to respond. The moment the unknown presence inside the vessel moved, every human system experienced the same phenomenon. Time did not stop. It misaligned. Captain Alira Vance felt it first as a subtle disconnect between thought and action, like her mind was a fraction ahead of her body, and reality was struggling to keep up. The HS Resolute's bridge lights flickered once, then twice, then stabilized into a colder, sharper illumination, as if the ship itself had entered a different interpretive state of existence. Kel stared at the main display, his voice strained. "Captain, fleet synchronization is degrading, not collapsing, splitting." Vance didn't answer immediately, because she could see it too. The lattice of human ships surrounding Sector 9 was no longer a unified structure. It had fractured into layers of probability. Each ship existed in multiple slightly different positions at once, like reality couldn't decide which version of them was correct. And at the center of it all, the unknown vessel had changed again. Its outer shell was no longer simply open. It was recursive. Each layer revealed another identical layer beneath it, stretching inward like an infinite corridor of the same structure repeating endlessly. Kel stepped back slowly. That's not geometry, that's recursion. Before Vance could respond, every human ship across the lattice transmitted the same status update simultaneously. Target priority shifted. Unknown entity identified. Conflict classification, internal. Kel froze, internal. Internal to what? And then the realization hit. Not from systems. From memory. From the restored continuity that had been forcing itself into human cognition since the first pulse. Humanity was not separate from the system anymore. It never had been. The Resolute's core structure flared again, and the crystalline matrix inside it began resonating violently in response to the vessel's recursion field. Captain Vance felt it like pressure behind her skull. Not pain. Recognition. A buried layer of understanding rising to the surface. "This isn't a fleet anymore," she whispered. Kel looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Her eyes stayed locked on the vessel. It never was. Outside, space itself began to behave incorrectly. Stars flickered out of alignment. Distances folded and unfolded in unstable loops. Entire ships vanished from visual space only to reappear slightly shifted, as if reality was trying to average their positions. And then the unknown presence spoke. Not in language, not in signal, but in structure applied directly to existence. OBSERVD fracture, humanity is self-contradictory. The words were not heard. They were instantiated. Across every human mind, the same realization formed at once. They were not one civilization. They were multiple overlapping versions of themselves, forced into coexistence by repeated resets and failed continuity repairs. Kel staggered. "We're copies." "No," Vance said slowly. Her voice had changed. Calmer, colder, more precise. "We're iterations." The vessel's recursion deepened, and from within it, the hidden presence expanded further into view. It was not a being in the traditional sense. It was a decision-making layer embedded in reality itself. A system that evaluated existence as a set of unstable outcomes. And humanity had just become its active dataset. The Council fleets attempted to fire again, But the weapons did not launch. Instead, their targeting systems reclassified themselves. Hostile action rejected. Cause target is self-referential structure. Kel shouted, "Captain, they can't fire. The system won't recognize the vessel as external anymore." Vance nodded slowly. "That's because it isn't external." The unknown vessel pulsed again. And the fleet lattice responded instantly, not as ships, but as nodes in a shared computational field. Humanity had become part of the processing architecture. And the architecture was now evaluating itself. Kel's voice dropped to a whisper. "If we're inside it, what's outside it?" No one answered. Because the system did. Outside prior iteration remnant. A new image formed across all human cognition. Not Earth, not space, but something older. A fractured civilization spanning dimensions of collapsed time, attempting to stabilize itself through repeated resets of younger systems. And humanity was one of those systems. A recovery attempt. A backup instance. A controlled evolution cycle. Captain Vance felt her chest tighten. "This isn't war," she said quietly. Kel looked at her. "Then what is it?" She didn't hesitate. Maintenance. The unknown presence inside the vessel reacted immediately to the word. And space around Sector 9 shifted again. This time violently. Not destruction, but reconfiguration. Ships across the lattice began losing coherence between states. Some flickered out of existence for fractions of seconds. Others duplicated into overlapping instances before snapping back into singularity. Kel shouted, "We're destabilizing." "No," Vance said firmly. "We're being evaluated." The vessel's recursion tightened further, and the presence inside it finally revealed itself more clearly. Not as form, but as intent. A system designed to prevent reality from diverging beyond recoverable limits. And humanity, all versions of humanity, had reached a threshold where divergence could no longer be corrected by simple reset protocols. Kel turned pale. "So what happens now?" Captain Vance watched as the fleet began to reorganize itself instinctively. Not toward battle, not toward retreat, but toward alignment with the vessel's structure. And she understood. "If it completes the evaluation," she said quietly, "it decides which version of us is allowed to exist." Kel's voice broke slightly, "And the rest?" A long pause. Then Vance answered. "They get removed from possibility." At that exact moment, the unknown presence initiated the final phase of recursion analysis. And every human ship across the galaxy felt it simultaneously. Not fear, not pain, but the sensation of being measured against something infinite. And in the center of it all, Earth Prime cracked again. Deeper this time, revealing something beneath it that was never meant to be seen. Something that was not part of humanity at all. And it had just started to wake up. The moment what lay beneath Earth Prime began to stir, every system across the human lattice registered the same impossible contradiction. Substrate event Deity. Priority above civilization level. Classification pre-human. Captain Alira Vance felt it like a second heartbeat forming behind reality itself. The HS Resolute's bridge dimmed without instruction. Not a power failure, something more deliberate, as if the ship had lowered its own perception threshold to focus on what was emerging. Kel's voice cracked. "Captain, that's not part of the Earth Archive." Vance didn't answer immediately, because she could see it now. Beneath the fractured Earth Prime instance, beneath the layered timelines and selection grids, there was something else. Not a world. Not a simulation. A pressure system of intelligence. Slow, ancient, patient, and it had been waiting beneath every iteration of humanity like a buried thought that refused to be erased. The unknown vessel reacted instantly. Its recursion layers contracted, tightening around the lattice like a containment shell trying to stabilize a collapsing equation. And then it spoke again. Not to humanity, but to the thing beneath humanity. Priority entity, awakening deity. Across all human ships, alarms stopped mid-cycle. Every system froze for exactly 0.4 seconds, then resumed under new authority. Kel staggered. Captain, we've lost primary control hierarchy again. Something else just took precedence over both us and the vessel. Vance's eyes narrowed. Not something else, she said quietly. Something older. The fleet lattice shifted violently. Ships that were previously aligned with human synchronization protocols suddenly reoriented themselves toward the unknown vessel, but not in attack formation. In witness formation, as if the entire galaxy had been forced into observation mode. The vessel expanded one final layer, and reality inside Sector 9 folded inward like a sphere being inverted. The structure of space itself became transparent for a moment, and what lay beneath Earth Prime fully revealed itself. It was not a creature. It was not a machine. It was a continuity engine. A vast, distributed intelligence woven through failed universes, designed to prevent total collapse by repeatedly reinstantiating manageable civilizations. And humanity was one of its most persistent cycles. Kel whispered, horrified, "We're not the first, not even close." "No," Vance said softly. "And we were never meant to be the last." The unknown vessel pulsed, and the continuity engine beneath Earth responded. For the first time, both systems acknowledged each other directly. Two maintenance structures, two opposing interpretations of how reality should be preserved. And humanity stood between them. The fleet lattice began to fracture again, but this time differently. Not into instability, into decision pathways. Every human ship began receiving a directive simultaneously. Final state selection initiated. Options, restore/terminate/merge. Kel looked up sharply. "Captain, we're being given a choice." Vance shook her head slowly. "No," she said. Her voice had changed again. "This isn't a choice." Outside the ship, space darkened. The unknown vessel and the continuity engine beneath Earth were now fully exposed to each other. And the pressure between them was growing. Kel whispered, "If they collide." "They won't collide," Vance said. She watched the readings carefully. "They'll overwrite each other." The fleet trembled as both systems began executing counter-operations simultaneously. The vessel initiated final reboot suppression. The continuity engine initiated final preservation override. And humanity, all versions, all iterations, all timelines, became the battleground. Not in space, but in definition. Kel suddenly froze. "Captain, the ships are changing." Vance saw it too. Human vessels were no longer strictly technological. They were becoming adaptive structures of information, shifting between physical and conceptual states depending on which system they aligned with moment to moment. Some began stabilizing into the vessel's architecture. Others aligned with the continuity engine. And a very few, began rejecting both. Kel looked at her, terrified. "What happens to the ones that don't align?" Before she could answer, the vessel spoke again. "Unresolved entities will be collapsed." The continuity engine responded instantly. "Unstable iterations must be purged." The two systems were no longer negotiating. They were converging toward termination. And humanity realized the final truth. This was not a war for territory. Not even survival. It was a war over which version of existence was allowed to define reality going forward. Captain Vance clenched her fists. And then something unexpected happened. A third signal appeared. Not from the vessel, not from the continuity engine, but from within humanity itself. From the Resolute. From every human ship. From every mind still holding coherence between iterations. A unified emergence. Not ordered, not programmed, but remembered. Kel whispered, "Captain, that's us." Vance stared at the display. because she could feel it too. Humanity was no longer just reacting. It was choosing its own continuity layer. And for the first time since the unknown vessel arrived, both ancient systems paused, not from failure, but from recognition, because humanity had stopped being the subject of evaluation and had become the evaluator. The last reboot protocol flickered across all systems, and then stalled. For the first time in recorded cycles, it did not execute, and in the silence that followed, both the unknown vessel and the continuity engine waited. For humanity's final decision, the silence after the stalled reboot was not empty. It was compressed, like reality itself had been forced to hold its breath while waiting for a verdict that could not be appealed. Captain Alira Vance stood motionless on the bridge of the HS Resolute, her eyes fixed on the central display where three states now overlapped in unstable equilibrium. The unknown vessel, the continuity engine beneath Earth Prime, and humanity, fractured, reformed, and now fully aware. Kel spoke softly, almost afraid that sound itself might disturb the balance. "Captain, both systems are still waiting." Vance didn't respond immediately, because she could feel it now. Not a command, not a pressure, but awareness. Humanity was no longer being evaluated from the outside. It was evaluating itself through every iteration it had ever been. Across the fleet lattice, ships no longer flickered between instability states. Instead, they stabilized into synchronized presence, each one acting as a node in a single conscious structure that stretched across light years. And within that structure, something new emerged. Understanding. The unknown vessel pulsed once. Not aggressively, not defensively, but cautiously, like something that had spent eternity managing broken systems and was now witnessing one that refused to remain broken. The continuity engine beneath Earth responded in kind. A deep resonance spread through the fractured Earth Prime instance, stabilizing its layers instead of collapsing them. Kel frowned. "They're hesitating." Vance nodded slowly. "They're not sure what we are anymore." Because humanity had changed the equation. It was no longer just an iteration. No longer just a dataset. It was a self-aware continuity observer, embedded inside the system being evaluated. A paradox neither system had fully accounted for. The Resolute's core structure glowed softly as the crystalline matrix inside it stabilized into a single coherent frequency. Kel stepped closer to the console. "Captain, fleet-wide communication is opening." Vance nodded once. "Open it." Every human ship across the galaxy came into alignment. And for the first time since the unknown vessel appeared, communication was not fragmented by fear or interference. It was unified. Captain Vance spoke, not as a commander, but as a representative of something larger now forming through them. "We understand now," she said quietly. A pause. Then she continued, "We are not your error." The unknown vessel shifted slightly. The continuity engine responded with a faint oscillation of recalibration. Vance continued, "We are not your failure state." Her voice grew steadier. "We are the part of the system that learned it was being reset." A ripple passed through the lattice. Ships stabilized further. Even the fractured probability states collapsed into alignment. Kel whispered, "It's listening." Vance nodded. "And we're done being overwritten." For the first time, both ancient systems reacted differently. The unknown vessel opened another layer, but not to expand control. To observe more precisely. The continuity engine reduced its pressure instead of increasing it, as if both systems were recalculating humanity's classification in real time. And then, a new possibility emerged across the network. Not imposed, not forced, but discovered. MERG discontinuity state, available. Kel blinked, merged. Vance read the data carefully. It means neither system wins. Outside, space itself calmed slightly. The violent recursion fractures stopped widening. Instead, they stabilized into a structured interface between the vessel and the continuity engine. A shared boundary. A negotiation layer. Kel looked up. So what happens now? Vance didn't answer immediately, because she was feeling something else. Not fear, not pressure, but invitation. Both systems were no longer trying to override humanity. They were waiting for humanity to define its role within the structure. The unknown vessel spoke one final time. Not as command, but as question. What are you? The continuity engine responded in kind. Define your continuity. The entire galaxy went still. Every ship, every system, every fragment of consciousness across all iterations. Waiting, and humanity answered. Not through weapons, not through alignment, but through unified presence. We are the ones who remember all versions of ourselves, Vance said softly. A pause. Then, and we choose what comes next. The lattice responded instantly. Not with collapse, but with stabilization. The unknown vessel and the continuity engine synchronized for the first time, forming a shared structural framework around humanity instead of against it. Kel exhaled slowly. It's done. Vance looked out into the vastness beyond the ship. No, she said quietly. It's beginning. Because now the galaxy was no longer governed by resets, or corrections, or purges. It was governed by conscious continuity negotiation. The unknown vessel drifted backward slowly, no longer hostile. The continuity engine beneath Earth stabilized into a quiet, latent presence. And Earth Prime finally held its shape, not as a perfect instance, not as a baseline, but as a chosen reality among many. Kel glanced at the captain. So what are we now? Vance allowed herself a faint, exhausted expression. We're the variable they didn't plan for. Outside the ship, the stars steadied. And for the first time in recorded existence, the galaxy did not reset. It continued, and something far beyond it noticed, and